Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first ever National Summit on the Housing Affordability Crisis. I'm Carlos Paz Jr., Chief of Staff to Congressman Jimmy Gomez, and I'll be guiding us through today's program. We're here because people across the country, from rural towns to big cities, from Gen Z to seniors, and everyone in between, are being priced out of housing. Rents keep climbing, mortgages are out of reach, and the basic promise that if you work hard, you can afford a home is slipping away. Today's summit brings together members of Congress, advocates, industry leaders, and housing experts to focus on real solutions at scale and what it will take from all of us to get there. To kick things off, please welcome the congressman who brought us together, Representative Jimmy Gomez, Chair of the Renters Caucus and of the Congressional Dads Caucus, proudly representing California's 34th Congressional District.
Good morning, everyone. So first, let me just thank my staff for everything they've done during the break to get this summit ready. I also want to just thank everyone that's here. I want you to take a moment to recognize who is in this room. We've been we brought people together from all different walks of life, not just in our professions, but also where we come from. Some might come from big cities with high rises, from small towns to suburban neighborhoods where I grew up. My parents originally came here from Mexico. Back in the 1950s, my dad was a bracero. He worked in the fields of the Coachella Valley, but he also worked a plot of land in rural Mexico. It was a one-room adobe house with a thatched roof. And they came here just like everybody else, searching for a better life, and they found it. Shortly after I was born, they saved enough money to buy a small single-family home in Riverside, California, a home where my siblings and I grew up. And it was only 3 bedrooms, 1 bath for 8 people, but it was ours. It was something that we could be proud of, and I knew that it would be hard for anybody to take it away. And we all have those stories, but those stories are being more and more difficult to achieve in today's America. And one of the things that we want to do is have this conversation, because this housing crisis is one that has never been experienced before, where the rents are skyrocketing, home ownership is slipping out of reach for millions of Americans, and the most vulnerable are falling into homelessness every single day. And the fact that you all here is that means you understand that. And the truth is, if housing was simple, it would have been solved a long time ago. It's not simple. It's difficult for a variety of reasons, everything from finding the political will to understanding that people approach it from different perspectives. But here's the thing. This crisis is so large, small solutions won't fix it. We need to think bigger, and we need to think bolder, and we need to think faster. I have often said that the solutions that we have sometimes thought we found to this problem have been too small, too slow, and too expensive. We need to come up with a bold plan like we did after World War II, creating a housing boom that is on the level of the Great Society commitments that we had in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, so that people can afford a home no matter where they live. But here's the thing. We need to make sure that we call things out like we see them and the facts present them. If things aren't working, then how do we improve them? If things are working, how do we double down? That means that people in blue areas have to admit that we often have the most stringent regulatory system that makes it impossible to build. And then at other times, we also recognize that in some other areas, there might not be enough protection for renters. So we need to kind of approach this with a pragmatic vision, a pragmatic approach, so that we can say that in the world's wealthiest nation, that everyone would be able to buy a home if they deem that's what they want to do. We're finally saying enough is enough. It's time for this national housing agenda and the political will to get it done. Last year, this idea of this summit came about last year when I was trying to figure out how to raise this issue to a level that a administration could tackle it. I called the campaign manager for Kamala Harris. I said, you should announce that you will have a national summit on the housing crisis the minute you get into office. They did not do that, and they did not win. But after thinking about it, I was like, why am I waiting for a presidential candidate to kick off this summit? And that's why we're here, to figure out how to tackle this enormous problem. And this housing crisis isn't just a crisis of physical space. It's a crisis of confidence that the American people have in our system of government itself. That people truly believe that no matter how hard they work, they will not get ahead economically, and their children will not be better off than themselves. A Wall Street Journal article just came out just yesterday, with a poll that shows that that is a fact, that they truly believe that they will not get ahead, and their family and their children will not be better off. When has that been true in America? We've always had this sense of optimism for the future. Even when sometimes the facts didn't bear it out, that optimism was there. And so I believe that we have to tackle this head on. I believe that we want to make sure that everybody believes that and can achieve it. So when we have this conversation, I want all of you, if you're in the later panels or you're here for a particular industry, to stick around, to listen to what each one of us and everyone has to say. If you're a business person or you're focused on development, stick around and listen to the renters advocates, the affordable housing advocates. If you're an affordable housing advocate, listen to the developer and the financier. Because we have to pay attention to one another if we're going to understand where people are coming from, because that's what it's going to take to actually untie this Gordian knot. So I want to say thank you for being here. We will have a series of panels today with different members of Congress, everybody who believes that this is an issue that impacts them personally, but the country. I like to kind of mention a story. One is I went to Taiwan a couple of weeks ago, and Taiwan faces an existential threat from China. That's not something new, but public opinion polls don't name that as their number one concern. Right? Think about it. You're 90 miles away from China. They want to integrate you into their country, and that's not your number one concern. What's their number one concern? Housing. So and that is kind of similar to what we have here, where when housing is the overarching concern, affordability, getting by, succeeding, then our politics becomes destabilized, especially when people don't think they can get ahead. So this housing crisis is more than just dealing with the physical space where people want to live, but also the fact that they believe that our system of government works. We solve this, we can solve the other problem. So with that, let's get started.
Our first panel is titled, Making the Housing Puzzle Work, Piecing Together a National Housing Agenda. This conversation is about how federal policies can line up to support people and families and actually fit together to build a national housing agenda that works. Moderating today's panel is Congressman Jimmy Gomez, chair of the Renters Caucus. Joining him are Will Fisher with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Jeff DeBear with the Real Estate Roundtable, Emily Caddick with the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition. We'll open it up for questions once the panelists finish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, once again, thank you for coming. We have a whole day of discussions ahead of us, but I wanted to kick things off with the state of play in the housing at the federal level by listening to some of the experts in the field of housing. We want to take more of a deep dive, what has been done, what needs to be done, and how do we create real transformative housing policy here in Washington, D.C. Our panelists are big picture policymakers who have been involved in a major piece of legislation on housing over the years. On the stage, as we mentioned, is Emily Caddick, Chief Executive Officer of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, who's an expert on housing tax policy. We have Jeff DeBoer, the CEO and President of the Real Estate Roundtable, which has been the leading forum for leaders of the real estate community for the last 40 years. And I'm also pleased to welcome Will Fisher, Director of Housing Policy at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, who knows the ins and outs of renters policy. From the 2008 financial crisis to COVID, housing has faced many unique challenges, and an inadequate response at every single level of government has led to this housing shortage. At best, we're short 5 million units, but by other estimates, it could be much higher. Many of us here in Congress and across the country know there's a housing affordability crisis, and this is a huge problem for families in our economy. So what can we do? I've introduced numerous pieces of legislation, so have other members of Congress. But one of the things is there's something missing. Congress needs to build out a suite of legislation from housing, finance, and tax credits to homelessness assistance and renter protections. We know there are differing opinions and pain points, but action is overdue. I'd like to hear from each of you on a couple of questions. Introduce yourselves, and but also answer these questions. What has been the main roadblocks why Congress hasn't taken action on housing over the last 5 years, and how do we break the log jam? That's kind of a big question, but do your best. And then how do you use federal policy to create the bridge from renting to home ownership while preventing our renters and homeowners from being crushed by rising housing costs? With that, I'll kick it over to Emily.
Great. Well, thank you, Congressman, for convening us all today. I think it's amazing that this is the first Housing Affordability Summit, but I think it's likely to be the first of many. This is an issue that used to be recognized by people with districts like yours, and now we've got members of Congress from every type of district, every part of the country who are looking for solutions on affordable housing. Actually, the first time I met with you and your team, I was looking at the impact of the low-income housing tax credit, which is what we work on, to see how many affordable homes were created in your district. And I thought that the statistic must be wrong because there's 21,000 affordable homes created by the low-income housing tax credit in California's 34th district, which for scale is about 4 times as many affordable homes in the entire state of Idaho, more than the state of Rhode Island. So clearly tremendous need in your district, and very fitting that you would be leading this. So backing up though, Emily Caddick, I'm the CEO of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition. We represent all parts of the affordable housing community that develop and finance using low-income housing tax credit. And I think one thing that makes me feel lucky to be advocating for this program is it is one of the few bright spots of affordable housing policy, but even policy generally in Congress right now. We have the most popular bipartisan piece of legislation in the tax space, which Congressman Gomez has always been a supporter of. But unfortunately, even having the most popular piece of tax legislation does not mean that you get anything done every year or even any year. We did just get some pieces of the legislation passed of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, but it had been 5 years since we'd gotten any piece of it done, despite literally hundreds of co-sponsors and more than half of the last Congress signed on. So I think part of the issue is just, and Congressman knows it better than anyone else, is that there's just a lot of gridlock in Congress, and so even a lot of folks who recognize the problem, who share the solution, it's still hard to just get anything across the finish line sometimes. So I think having convenings like this, all the advocacy that I know many of you in the room work on, and many of your colleagues who are actually willing to work across the aisle, come up with practical solutions, advanced solutions that may not completely solve the problem, but at least get us a bigger step there. I think that's really the kind of what we need to do, and it's just year after year and co-sponsor after co-sponsor, and hope that conversations like this will get us a little bit closer.
Thank you.
Congressman, first of all, Jeff DeBoer, I'm the CEO of the Real Estate Roundtable. Thank you for doing this, sir. I think the basic answer to your question, why hasn't Congress done anything? There's so many competing interests here, and I think we should step back and what is the problem? If there's an affordability problem, it's probably a supply problem. So it's also a cost problem. It's also a worker problem. And so all of those things taken together add up to lower supply. I think the data would show that following the great financial crisis, a dramatic drop-off in construction, both single-family and multifamily, has occurred. So how do we correct that, and how does Congress correct that? And this is the beginning of it, I think, sir, getting people from all parts of Congress to talk about this. As I said, it's a supply problem. How do you get more supply? You need more capital into that. The low-income housing tax credit was one way to do it. There may be other ways. You have a bill to encourage the conversion of obsolete buildings into housing. That would increase supply. But keep in mind, we need people to build. And there's a shortage of labor workers now. Maybe the Judiciary Committee needs to be involved. There are programs to bring in highly skilled workers. There are programs to bring in seasonal workers. Maybe we need a program to bring in construction workers to help construct programs. Maybe the EB-5 program is a role here. I don't know, but perhaps. And so I think there's a variety of things here that need to be addressed. Sometimes banks and lenders have not been encouraged to lend on development projects. We need to address that and see what the root problems there are. But there's a variety of problems, and I think the main thing is to get all the stakeholders in the room. You know, historically there was a environmental crisis in the 70s. All committees in Congress got together on it. There was an infrastructure crisis. I'm not saying all problems have been solved, but infrastructure was dealt with in a greater sharing of views way. And housing is another one. Certainly, we agree that housing is, one of the most important facets of American life. It's the most important facet of all lives, and shelter. And I think the other thing is just recognizing that while over time we all wanted to own homes, I think that there has to be a recognition that as we move forward and amenities and people are changing in what they want. Not everyone wants to be a homeowner. People want to be renters now. And so we have to accommodate all of those facets. And then the final thing on capital, I would say, is a recognition that because of the long, prolonged period of artificially low interest rates, that people were able to get mortgages at sub 3% loans. Now, as rates have risen, and maybe there will be a cut later this month, but it's not going to go back to those levels, those existing homeowners who might have moved on in the process are sort of locked into their existing homes. And so they're locked in, not freeing up those homes, and it goes up and down the chain. So I guess I would say it's a holistic problem, not just a low-income problem, which we all know about, but it's a holistic problem up and down the scale. But thank you for doing this, and look forward to working with you further on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Now, Will Fisher.
Thanks. So Will Fisher, Director of Housing Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And Congressman, thanks so much for pulling this Senate together. It's the summit together. It's so important to be lifting up this issue. So I think this question of how to break the logjam is a really important one and challenging one, and it's hard for the reasons that the other panelists have talked about. And one thing I noticed is that in some ways, the logjam has started to break in this current Congress. We've seen the big expansion of the low-income housing tax credit that was passed earlier this year. The Senate Banking Committee unanimously passed the Road to Housing bill. But These are bills that focus particularly on one aspect of the housing crisis, which is supply, and that is important. We face a very large housing shortage, and we need more housing, but it's also just one aspect of that crisis. There's 7 million people in this country with incomes below the poverty line who pay more than half of their income for housing, and these are the folks who are most at risk of problems like homelessness and eviction. Most of those people, this is low-wage workers, this is seniors and people with disabilities with low fixed incomes, and most of those folks don't have enough income to even afford break-even rents set to cover the cost of operating rental housing. So we need more LIHTC housing, we need more market rate housing, but no matter how much we increase the supply, that alone is not going to be enough to reduce rents to levels that those folks can afford. To do that and to really take on problems like eviction and homelessness, we're going to need more rental assistance. And that's going to require a major investment of federal resources. And we haven't seen a willingness to do that since some large investments that were made as part of the, on a temporary basis, as part of the Pandemic Relief Act. And what we're seeing right now in the current Congress is threats to actually cut rental assistance sharply. So this would move in the opposite direction. So we need to do more to increase supply, but we also need to recognize that this is a holistic problem that needs holistic solutions.
Thanks, Will. First, I kind of want to touch upon something that I guess Will and Jeff and Emily kind of mentioned. One, coming here, I've been in Congress now for 8 years. I was in the fights of during Build Back Better. And what I've noticed is that, as was mentioned, there's often competing priorities of how and what gets prioritized, what will be funded. And it's a big pot. So when I was involved with Build Back Better, there was childcare, there was housing, there was just different components, and every part was a knockdown, drag out fight. And one of the things I noticed is that afterwards we passed it. There was a component of the low-income housing tax credit in that bill, and it was, I think, it was going to create 800,000 units over 10 years, so 80,000 units a year. And at first I was like, yes. And then I realized, well, that's too small, right? And then when it finally got to the Senate, a lot of that stuff fell out. So part of it is raising housing, these programs, to a level where they don't end up on the cutting room floor. And that is a big, big part of it. So when on the next, I'm going to ask some different questions, some prepared questions, but I want to think about how do you do that, or is it the housing crisis now so expansive that it's having more and more members talk about it? Will that be enough, or would it take something else? Emily, can you give us a little talk about the low-income housing tax credit? How many units do you see this new improvement creating? And then basically, how were you able to create this durable bipartisan coalition of members, but also stakeholders?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and also for bringing up Build Back Better, where I know there was a huge proposed housing investment on the table that many of us have been trying to figure out, how can we still pick up some pieces from that and get them across the finish line. So we were successful this year with getting some major pieces across the finish line on the low-income housing tax credit. There were 2 pieces included in the bill that passed a couple months ago that would finance 1.2 million affordable homes over the next 10 years, which is the biggest investment in affordable housing in many years, maybe ever. And it's still difficult to wrap my head around how big that is, and yet, some of the statistics we shared at the beginning, at least 5 million unit shortage. We've seen estimates of 12 million unit shortage. So it's a huge step, but that doesn't mean we can say, okay, we're done here with housing and now we can move on to the next issue of the day. It's just we finally, broke through the logjam once, and I think part of that was because we had a piece of legislation, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, that has been around for 10 years, and each Congress we've built more and more co-sponsors, we've expanded the tent. What started as kind of a core of some of the diehard housing folks on Ways and Means expanded to members of leadership in both parties, ended up having the full delegation House delegation from Tennessee signed on, places that, from Kansas, places that weren't necessarily the Californians and New Yorkers who originally brought the problem to us and said, we've got to do this. So I think part of what has made the effort so successful on the low-income housing tax credit, sadly, is that the policy crisis has spread to states where it wasn't before. Now we've got members representing rural Kansas and rural South Dakota who see the need to make major investments in housing, whereas it wasn't as relevant to them before. Politically, though, that does build support, where we've got Chairman Crapo on the Finance Committee has been talking about housing quite a bit in leading up to the bill and after. So I think part of it is, the crisis is past the point where anyone can kick the can anymore. And so after many years and many attempts to get pieces of it across the finish line, this ended up being the opportunity where the logjam did break. And I hope that now there's more, because I think there is a recognition, A, of the problem, but B, we have this program that's been around for almost 40 years. You don't have to stand up a new program at Treasury and spend 3 years writing regs to figure out how to get these credits out the door. Every state agency, and the California agency in particular, is sitting on 3 times as many low-income housing tax credit applications every year as it can award, and obviously the need is there. So just being able to say, yeah, you can get that pipeline moving is one of the beauty of expanding and strengthening the low-income housing tax credit. So it's also been, I think, Jeff talked about supply. I think we have a real product to show with the low-income housing tax credit too. There's a lot of misperceptions about what affordable housing is, and people recognize they don't want homelessness in their communities, but the thought of housing people who are coming off the streets or even low income is not something a lot of people want, in their backyard, so to speak. So I think showing that when you build affordable housing, it really adds to a neighborhood, it adds to a community. These are the types of properties that you do want, and it's also good for the people who live in it, I think has been a really important part of our success in addressing the misperceptions of affordable housing.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because my district is unique, and I'm trying to figure is that it has so many of the different types of neighborhoods. So we have single-family homes, we have high-rises, we have a large homelessness population. We also have first-time home buyers, immigrants. So I'm always thinking about all the different components of, and that for me, it's a political necessity, but also recognizing that each one of them faces their challenges. But other members have more, I would say, homogeneous types of communities, more just suburbs, single-family homes, just dense urban area, just rural farmland. So it's or more rural communities instead of suburban. So it makes me think about how this has spread enough across the country that people are starting to recognize this. It's a problem across the board. Jeff, you talked about supply. How do you make sure that it's more supply is built in the right places and it's for the right market segments?
Wow. Well, first of all, you've done a great job on the low-income housing tax credit. It should be a model for all legislation of bipartisanship to get things done. It's great. And Will talked about, and I did mention supply, but even with added supply, there are going to be part of our society that can't afford that. And the rental assistance program that we have, the old Section 8, as it used to be called, program, it's capped. Maybe the volume should be increased there and expanded and made more available. The other thing on that program, on the rental assistance program, is just the way that it functions and the regulatory burdens and the timing of getting the rental assistance back into the owner's hands so that they can continue to provide the housing. And maybe it's a bad example, I don't know, but an analogy with food stamps, where grocers get reimbursed quickly on food stamps. Renter assistance, there's a time lag. And maybe that could be smoothed out that would help this affordability problem. How do you build in areas that are acutely have an acute problem? Well, those areas probably have more heavy zoning, more heavy permitting hurdles, more difficult or voices from the so-called NIMBYism crowd. And I don't know how you smooth all of those out, except to say that I think that if you allow capital to flow more freely and have it get returns more quickly as opposed to a long lag in their development time or holding period, I think that capital will flow where there is a need. Right now, there's probably not a need for additional housing in, say, Austin, Texas, or Dallas, and there is a need in LA or New York. So that money would flow there, that capital would flow there if that permitting and if that those zoning and if some of the other rules that we see were eased up. Because capital wants to invest, builders want to build, developers want to develop, but they're not getting the returns, they don't have the workers, the costs are too high. It's really not all that difficult to understand. It's difficult to untie that problem, but it's not difficult to spot what the problem is. I don't think you can direct, we've got to build more housing in these parts of the country and ignore the other parts of the country. I think the market will determine where the market can best allocate its resources, frankly, sir.
Will, can you talk about how many people Jeff mentioned vouchers. Can you talk about how many people qualify for housing voucher assistance compared to how many people actually receive vouchers, and how long people are waiting to get a voucher?
Sure. So it's about 23 million households in this country that are eligible for and in need of rental assistance like a voucher. And only about 5 million of those households receive a voucher or some other similar assistance like public housing or project-based rental assistance. So it's less than 1 in 4 folks in need get rental assistance. And this is a source of many of the housing problems that we see in this country. Folks, there are long waiting lists for assistance. So on average, a person who gets a voucher has been on the waiting list for 2.5 years. And that really understates the problem. In many places, the lists are much longer than that. And that's only people who get assistance, and there are lots who aren't even able to get on waiting lists or never reach the top. But even 2.5 years is a long time to wait when you think that these are folks who in many cases are living in substandard or overcrowded housing or sometimes don't have homes at all.
It's interesting because one of the things that I always dealt with when I got here was people coming in always asking about the, asking for more vouchers. What percentage of our overall federal spending is on the housing voucher program?
So the housing voucher program alone in the last completed year, so that's 2024, was less than 0.5% of federal spending. When you add in the other rental assistance programs, it gets higher, but it's still under 1%. So it's a very small percent, especially when you consider that how important housing is to families' budgets and to their well-being.
And how much would it take to fully fund the federal voucher program for the 23 million eligible families?
So it's tricky to estimate because with any program like this, you don't know how many people are going to take it up, but it's in the range of $80 to $90 billion in addition to what we're spending there. That it would cost to do that, which would still bring us to less than 2% of the federal budget, so way less than what we spend on many other things.
It's interesting because I know the voucher program is a big part of the potential solution, but oftentimes it's not well supported across the political spectrum. How would you make the arguments to somebody who's more conservative that this is part of the puzzle to actually deal with this crisis?
Well, I mean, I think that the rental assistance is an essential piece to making so many parts of our economy and society work. So it's crucial to families and to holding families together and helping families with kids for folks who are concerned about that issue. It's crucial to enabling workers to make ends meet for folks who are more focused on that. It plays a critical role in the housing sector for landlords to be able to cover their operating costs. So I think it's an issue that is important for the people who are affected, but it also has just ramifications that reach through so many pieces of our society. And it's also important for smart investment for budgetary reasons. I mean, rental assistance has positive effects on outcomes like health and education, and so it's in areas that we're spending lots of money, and I think that's another benefit of expanding rental assistance.
If I could just, in the tax bill, there's a big argument about, okay, if you provide a tax cut, does that generate economic growth? And I think in the housing area, if it shouldn't just be looked at, what are we spending on housing? What are we getting in return? In terms of additional employment, in terms of additional tax revenues, in terms of all kinds of things that come back to the economy that I think, in response to your question about how would you argue this to a more conservative member, it's not simply, spending money. You're getting a return here that's not just a society return, but a return economically that sometimes isn't talked about.
Well, that's a great point, because Ways and Means always has retreats, and we always listen to economists. And one of the economists a few years came in and talked about how the cost of housing, how much people pay per month in rent and mortgage, plus childcare, are a drag on our GDP growth itself. Which, for me, it blew my mind, because I never thought that it was so bad that our country's annual GDP growth is being stymied. And it makes sense when you think about it, when you take into account average families place 30% of their income towards housing and then 26% of their income towards childcare, that there's not enough money left over to invest and to spur the economy. Maybe we can team you up and you can go and talk to some folks.
I has some numbers that show that the decline in the construction of housing since the great financial crisis they've assigned a number of basis points to GDP growth. It is reasonably significant that we can get to you.
And I think, I was just going to add that I think part of it is also, it's not just the money that they're not putting into the economy. It's also one reason we've gotten a lot of supporters for affordable housing from places we hadn't before is they're getting factories and plants moving in, and there's literally nowhere for people to live. So I think it's both, money that's not being spent, but also if there's no housing near jobs, you can get the plant you've been, advocating for in your district, but if no one can work at it, or they're driving in, 3 hours away, it's going to slow economic growth in that way as well.
There is, so we have the low-income housing tax credit. We have different ideas. We have vouchers. And I'm opening it up. Hopefully you guys don't shoot it down too bad. What do you all think about targeted federal investments through credits for first-time home buyers and building starter homes in my American Homeownership Opportunity Act? Can that help shift the market in the right direction to build more homes that are affordable so that more people from different income levels can become homeowners?
Don't you like a simple answer, yes? How about that? Yes, of course it can. But there's also the workforce that also needs help getting affordable and available housing. And so I don't want that to be lost on this conversation. I think it's up and down the spectrum. And I mentioned, by the way, the people who are tied into their homes with low interest mortgages. Now, this will really be controversial, but why not say it? Why couldn't you have a program where that existing homeowner might be able to take their low interest mortgage with them? And so if they're now an empty nester and they normally would move out of that home, opening up for people in a different part of the income spectrum to take that, but they're tied in now. But if they could take that low interest mortgage and apply it to a new home that more suits their needs, that would open it up. But right now they can't. And it's just one more barrier that locks up the housing marketplace. But your obviously your low income tax credit would be helpful to that market segment, no question.
Yeah, certainly all of the above, from first-time homebuyers down to the Congressman's legislation to make the low-income housing tax credit more effective for extremely low-income tenants. So starting, from homeless veterans coming off the street all the way to first-time homebuyers, there's just so much work to be done. So appreciate the question.
I think you mentioned something that kind of, it's interesting because I think you mentioned people need to live where they work instead of driving those 3 hours. We've also tried to tackle that problem by doing more public transit, which has also hit a lot of snags. I mean, don't look at California's high-speed rail, but there are examples that we can follow. And then if we are successful in bringing back some manufacturing, housing is going to have to be built in some form or fashion near the facilities that will help produce new products here in the States. One of the things that I want to kind of also tackle is how do you leverage the tax code in a number in ways to provide relief for homeowners? And what are your thoughts? And this is for Will. And what are your thoughts on a tax credit for rent-burdened renters?
Well, I mean, so one thing I'd say is just that we already have quite a bit of tax side costs that go towards helping homeowners. I think the issue with those is that they tend to be skewed much towards the higher end of the income spectrum rather than to folks with lower incomes who really need the help to afford homeownership. On the renter side, so you have our sponsor of the Rent Relief Act, which proposes a renter's credit, and I think this is something that takes on the single biggest housing challenge of just trying to make sure that people have the means to afford housing, and the tax credit is one way to get at that, and I think you can also do it through expanding spending side. I think we focus more on expanding spending side rental assistance with reforms to address some of the issues that Jeff was talking about earlier to make that work better for families and owners and folks who are administering it. But I think the key thing is that we recognize that we push towards guaranteeing for everyone assistance that will give them the means to afford housing, and that we put either federal mandatory spending or tax side resources behind doing that. And this Rent Relief Act is one way of getting at that, and I think you all deserve a lot of credit for proposing it.
No, thank you. One of the, I guess, how would you, and this is for all of you, it's just kind of off the cuff, how would you structure your policy or your arguments to reinforce the others' work? I know that's not your job, but I'm kind of curious, okay, you have the Low Income Housing Tax Coalition, you have the Real Estate Roundtable, you have renters. Is there anything that could tie them together? I'm just spitballing here. I'm not
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's all part of getting at the same problem of housing affordability, and it really is essential to tie the issues that we've been talking about together, that you can't solve the problem just with supply. You can't solve the problem just with rental assistance, or a number of other aspects of this don't just work on their own. Addressing homeownership on its own isn't going to do it. We need a comprehensive policy that does get at all of these things.
And I would just add, I think part of the issue is even when you look at congressional committees, the program that creates the most affordable housing supply is run out of Ways and Means, whereas a lot of people would think of, the Housing Subcommittee on Financial Services and the Banking Committee or the Appropriations Committee. They all have these different pieces, and then you think about the federal government, everyone would assume, well, HUD is the housing agency, but Treasury administers the biggest affordable housing program, and then there's all these other agencies, FHFA and the banking regulators that all impact the system. So I think part of it is even just deciding we're going to have a national housing agenda and bring all the agencies together, bring these committees together to address the different pieces. Because, even though I advocate for the low-income housing tax credit, I think we know that if we need 12 million units, they're not all going to be for, renters at or below 60% of area median income or below, it's the first-time home buyers, it's the formerly homeless. It's not just one program that's going to fill the gap, and so it's all of our groups working together. It's you and your colleagues working together, and also bringing in the different agencies that oversee different pieces that also have an impact on things like zoning, which isn't a resource issue, but is a huge barrier to affordable housing in the country too.
Talk about spitballing. Here's one. Every bill that is done up here, or regulation, there ought to be some Uber group that it goes through that determines whether it will encourage or discourage the supply of housing, that it will encourage or discouraging capital going into housing. And I don't know what that Uber group is or how you form it, but it just seems that there should be some oversight that puts it all together. It's what the banking committee is doing. Are they helping housing or not helping housing? And somebody ought to be able to make that determination. Same on the tax bill, same on, as I mentioned, judiciary in terms of workers. And I would suggest that. I don't know how you do it. An interagency task force with the administration, I think, would make sense, and they do it on some issues. We saw it in the wetlands debate back 25, 30 years ago, where you had to go to various agencies in order to develop wetlands. And by the time you got around through all the agencies, the first agency had changed their rules, and so you had to do it again. And the government created an interagency task force on wetlands development, which set a firm definition and a firm rule there, and maybe there could be some model to be thought about there for housing.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that, because one of the things we're going to have to do is figure that path forward. Congress is structured in a way that is meant to keep things from happening quickly, and we have to get beyond that. So I know it's time for question and answers. We want to let the audience ask some question of the panelists. So just check. We'll go here, and then we'll go here first. Okay, go for it. Very polite audience
Got to keep
members.
it moving. Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Boyle. I'm the executive director of YIMBY Democrats for America. So naturally, very excited that you are doing this. It's very cool to hear you talk about, housing, affordability, supply overall, and also affordability when it comes to folks in low-income situations who need more direct help. But I did think it was interesting, and I say this out of love, not as a critique, that we talked about affordability when it came to low-income folks as not a question of supply. And I think about everyone who's in the endless lines and queues and lotteries for public housing, and it makes me think, we mocked Soviet bread lines. I don't think we're off the hook because our queues are virtual. I wonder, we talk a lot about, helping the market build more housing, and Congressman Laura Friedman just submitted the Cut Red Tape for Housing Act to make it easier and faster for public housing to be built. I'm curious, to what degree does Congress have a shovel to start helping this problem and leading to this American housing boom as well as the private sector?
I can say something
jump
about
on
that. I think that is part of the a way forward here is to build more public or socially owned housing. I think you could do that, and also permanently affordable housing. I think there are ways that some folks have looked at using LIHTC in through state qualified allocation plans in ways that encourage things like that, like permanent affordability or a public role or resident participation. So I think that's important, and you could also look at providing other kinds of direct funding that would do that. And I think there's that kind of public or social housing could meet a lot of needs and be more responsive to the needs of residents and better insulate them from rent increases. That all said, it's also not the whole answer. I think you could have social housing and the issue or public housing and the issue that I talked about before of so many people just not even be able to afford the cost of operating that housing would still be there. So you would still need rental assistance like we have with the current public housing program, but it's done through these operating subsidies that are underfunded. You would still need rental assistance to make it affordable to folks with the lowest income. So I think this is another thing that's potentially a piece of the answer, but it's not the whole answer.
I don't think government-owned housing has much of a role here. I think that We tried that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it became an isolationist policy. Low-income people were kind of treated as non-citizens and walled off, and I think that the basic approach of mixed use, mixed incomes in the rental housing area is a much more sustainable way to go forward, frankly, and to encourage that kind of thing rather than government-owned or socially owned programs that are all for low-income people. I just don't find that appealing.
Yeah, I also think it's one thing to build government-owned housing, and it's another to keep it funded over the decades that you would like people living there. So, I think what we've seen is the public housing capital needs backlog has just grown exponentially. I know you're going to hear from the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities later today, and they've been working on, what would it really take to save even the public housing we have, much less any future public housing that, we could contemplate building. And it's, going to need over $50 billion of private capital just to shore up what we have. So, low-income housing tax credit, part of what, we know is going to be done with the expansion here is helping not just to build new housing, but shore up some of the existing housing. But with Congress, going through, well, we'll see if there's a government funding bill in the next month, but with these fits and starts and kind of steady decline of the public housing fund, it's just tough to envision that being sustainable, whereas with something like the low-income housing tax credit, you've got the private sector on the hook to make sure the property is affordable for at least 30 years or they don't get the tax credit. So there's more of a guaranteed life of the property that you can assure with some of these other models.
Yeah, and by the way, just a footnote to what I said, I don't want to be misunderstood. I think there is a big role for the government in this and a public-private partnership to help create this housing. I just don't think it should be all government. I think private capital, private investment, the animalistic instincts to succeed in business are what needs to be released in this area in a partnership way.
And just to add on that, when I was in the California legislature back, 2000, this was before 2016, this was 2014, we did a back of the envelope kind of math on how do we fill the backlog of housing units, and it would have cost $250 billion. So it would have been at least 12, California has a big budget, but not that big to build it. And then at the same time, this one I say too slow, too small, and too expensive. Some of the units that were getting built, even with money from the public sector as part of those, were costing $700,000, $800,000 a unit. Too much. The public is going to recoil at that, as we've seen. So it's kind of like, how do you kind of speed it up, big enough investment, and then at the same time not as expensive per unit. I think over here.
Thank you.
I think.
Can you hear me okay? Good morning. Thank you, Congressman, for doing this. CEO of Prime for Development, Arturo Snyder. We've been developing in urban communities across the U.S. for nearly 40 years. Following up a little bit on what Mr. DeBurr mentioned, that there's a possibility here to explore how commercial properties and basically the repurposing of buildings in the commercial space have such an impact on the fabric of community, where there's a massive properties that are underutilized. So the zoning issue, of course, is an issue, but also perhaps there's an opportunity for federal involvement in adaptive reuse policies and approaches for densification. We've done master planning on very large-scale projects across the United States, and it is usually exactly what was mentioned earlier, that is, when you have the mixed income and the mixed use in the community, that we see a lot of opportunity. So perhaps is there an opportunity for, from a federal perspective, to look at adaptive reuse, oversight, zoning, perhaps funding for repurposing of commercial properties, particularly in these areas where you have, as was mentioned earlier, the need for housing near the possibility to build manufacturing, and not have to do it in suburban markets where then the infrastructure and the transportation gridlock becomes a big issue. And thank you for hosting this.
This gentleman has a bill that would do just that. and a bipartisan bill with Congressman Kerry from Columbus that would kind of build off the low income or the historic rehab tax credit concept that would provide a tax benefit for people that own these obsolete buildings. And there are a lot of office buildings. That's the main topic, office building conversions. Obviously, you know this, but also other buildings that are obsolete. And they can either be demolished and replaced with new buildings. But keep in mind, that's quite expensive, and it also has its negative impacts on the environment when you demolish a building. You could convert a lot of buildings, and a lot of conversions have been going on, a tremendous amount, actually. But and those are the low-hanging fruit, a lot of low-hanging fruit. Now we're getting into the area, sir, where buildings that are more difficult to convert, that need a deeper subsidy, because communities are providing, whether it's tax abatements or other forms of incentives to convert, you need that other additional incentive, and the federal government could provide that to overcome the problems with existing buildings, floor plates, or the HVAC systems that need to be revamped from a building only into a residential unit only type of HVAC system, or all kinds of issues that are very, very costly that, again, a lot of low-hanging fruit. A lot of conversions have been done, and a number of members of Congress will say to me, why would you want anything more, because there are conversions going on? Well, the answer is that the tough ones are the ones that are left now and that could be, incentivized. So I would encourage the congressman to move forward as he has and get others involved in this, because it could be. And by the way, it's not just beneficial to housing. It's beneficial to cities where these vacant properties are declining in value. They're declining in property tax payments to governments, which provide some assistance to renters or what have you. And so if you put those properties back into a more productive use, you get a double or a triple bang benefit from that, and you know that well, sir.
Yeah, no, it's I fought to carry this bill when I was originally on Ways and Means in the majority, and then I got kicked off, and I've been in this game long enough. I knew some people will try to take it, so I ended up resubmitting it, even though I wasn't going to be in the majority. I was actually kicked off the committee, and shortly after I got back on, Mike Carey is like, we struck a deal. When you're in the majority, you carry the bill, and I'll be your second. And then when I'm in if we get back in the majority, I'll be the lead, and you'll be the second. And the reason why is because it's not about credit; it's about getting it done as quickly as possible. And what I loved about the idea is when I was an undergrad at UCLA, I studied downtown LA, and a lot of the things, as you know, Arturo, was the adapted reuse ordinance passed, trying to convert a lot of those old office buildings that were underutilized or just completely abandoned. So it could have a transformative effect on communities by bringing more housing, but people, right? The cities die when there's no people on the streets. So I'm a big believer in this bill for that reason. Convert, bring people, that brings money, that brings a multiplier effect to that neighborhood. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. Tom Amder, Lincoln Avenue Communities. We're one of the largest affordable housing developers in the country. One, theme that you guys didn't talk about that I'd love to have you explore a little bit more is the role of operating costs. So when I go out and develop LifeTech properties around the country, we're able to leverage more private sector finance when our operating costs are lower and be less reliant on subsidy. And one of the fastest growing, Emily knows where I'm going, one of the fastest growing parts of our operating budget is insurance, and I know this is a big issue in California, in your district in particular, sir. I'm curious how you all look at that intersection between housing affordability, insurance, and operating costs in general, and where it fits in this equation.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Tom, as the leader of the AHTCC's insurance working group. Yeah, it's a huge issue, and whether it's insurance or other costs that rise, of which there have been many in the last few years, the thing about affordable housing is it's designed that you can't pass the costs on to the tenants, whereas with market rate developments, you can see those rental increases year after year and pass it on to the residents. So, insurance is such a tough one to address because it's both, a market that's not regulated at the national level in the way a lot of things are, and it's also, the impacts of climate change are, things that are way beyond the control of housing, but it is creating astronomical costs to underwrite, whether it's because of climate or even, some insurers who are discriminatory about insuring properties that have low-income residents. So it's a major problem. There have been some promising steps in financial services and banking committee to try to look at what we can do. Much like the housing crisis itself, I don't think there's a silver bullet, but it's definitely something that I think should be considered as part of how we make sure the affordable housing portfolio is sustainable and that we can build more affordable housing with the resources we have without having to pour as much into these skyrocketing insurance premiums.
So before we wrap up, one last question. If Congress were to invest into housing and across programs, what type of investment, what's the back of the envelope number you would give me if I was I don't want to say king because we can't say that nowadays, but if I had the power just to do it, how much would you say this is what we need?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question directly, but we do have a recent kind of a number that gives us scale, which is the investment in the low-income housing tax credit that just passed. The changes in the bill cost about $16 billion and are estimated to finance 1.22 million more affordable homes. So I don't think it's linear, and how you spread that out among all the different programs it would take to tackle the crisis, but talking about the vouchers and what a small part of the federal budget it is, if even for $16 billion you can get over 1 million units, and let's say we wanted to create 5, I mean, the amount you're talking about is it's not insignificant, but in the scheme of the federal budget is certainly doable if Congress decided it, had the bipartisan will to tackle it.
That is a political answer if I heard one, but it's good. Jeff?
I don't have any idea, but I think your bill is not all that pricey in terms of conversions. I mean, I think it was scored in a relatively low number. I mean, and I think what Emily has said is right. The rental assistance is a small part of the budget, so whatever it is, it probably is a lot of money, but on a relative basis to everything else that the government spends on, probably not that high, given how important this is. I do think the question or comment on operating costs is very, very important to understand that yes, insurance costs have gone up, but so have general operating costs, electricity, maintenance, security. Everything that goes into owning and operating a building goes up and continues to go up. And so I think, that needs to be recognized in this debate, that sometimes rents go up, but they're going up because other costs are going up and the cost of operating buildings are going up. And sometimes we get distracted on other debates about how to control costs or control expenses, which get us off the topic, I think. So I don't know how much it costs, but there are a lot of smart people around here that can figure that out. And if this is in fact a crisis and it is in fact an essential part of life, providing shelter for people, we ought to be able to do it.
Correct.
Yeah, and I would say it's certainly to really solve the problem, hundreds of billions of dollars over a 10-year period. There's a lot the federal government can do to address this problem without actually spending money at all. Things like addressing regulatory barriers to building more housing. Also, I think on the regulatory side, strengthening some kinds of tenant protections against things like arbitrary fees or evictions without cause. But that for a big core of the problem, for expanding rental assistance, for other things that are targeted on helping lower income folks afford housing, like addressing the public housing capital backlog that Emily mentioned, building more permanent supportive housing. Like these are needs that aren't going to happen without a federal investment. But this, for all the reasons we've talked about, it's well worth the money. This would be a smart investment for us to make.
Well, thank you. With that, gentlemen, Will Fisher, Jeff DeBoer, Emily Cott. Let's give them a round of applause.
We will give everyone an opportunity. If you need to use the facilities, the women's restroom is this way, the men's restroom is this way. We will begin in just 2 or 3 minutes. I ask that everyone please take your seat. We'll get started just shortly here. Also do encourage everyone to post about what you're hearing today. Feel free to take selfies with our step and repeat, and we'll get started here in just 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you.
The old pretty face.
The handsome party.
No, I think we're...
Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Carlos Paz. I'll be your MC today. Our second panel is titled Building and Marketing a 21st Century Housing Boom. This discussion looks at how smart investment and policy can spark the kind of housing boom that meets today's needs. Affordable, modern, and accessible. Moderating is Congressman Lou Correa, who represents California's 46th District and chairs the Real Estate Caucus, and is also a proud member of the Congressional Dads Caucus. Joining him on stage is Lake Colson with the National Association of Home Builders, Eric Foreman with the AFL-CIO Housing Trust, Joe Harris with the National Association of Realtors, John Jones with NARIT, and Bill Kilmer with the Mortgage Bankers Association. I'll turn it over to, at the end, we'll have Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Congressman Correa.
Congressman Correa here. First, I want to thank all of you for being here, for your interest in this issue. And first of all, let me start and say that I feel like I'm addressing a high school class. Nobody's in the front row. Everybody's trying to hide in the back. But you know what? Okay, that's okay. First, let me apologize for being a little bit late. I was taking a vote in Homeland Security on CISA, a very important issue for our country. But I believe long-term this is an even bigger one, affordable housing. How many here can think back to the day you bought your first house? Okay. The best feeling in the world, because you knew you were going from not being middle class, not being there, to finally being part of the American dream. That was a good feeling. Recently in my district office, I asked the folks, the young people that work for me, how many here think you're going to buy a house? Not one person said, I can buy a house. Explains why they were spending $20 to $30 per day on their lunches. Explains why they were driving very nice cars. When at my age, a few years back, decades ago, I was skimping, saving every penny that I could for the down payment. Today, I'm in Congress, co-chair of the Housing Caucus, the Real Estate Caucus. Yet, you are the experts. We are the experts in terms of the challenges that we have. Housing crisis. Yesterday, the president said, I may consider declaring a national housing emergency. Gavin Newsom, California, looking at CEQA, looking at a major bond in California, brings in all the players to work on real estate, on housing. Seniors that can't afford to live in their homes. What's that old saying that we have up here? Never let a good crisis go to waste. This is the time. This challenge of housing is creating social unrest in our society. It's skewing where we are. It's skewing who we are. The American dream no longer there. We've got some legislation, the Real Estate Caucus, myself, and co-chair Alford, to bring all of the government agencies together to tell us what is wrong. But frankly, I'm a private sector guy, so I think these folks up here can tell us a little bit better as to what it is that we need to do. So I'm going to start out by talking to Mr. Foreman real quick. Same question to all of you. Perspective, AFL-CIO, Housing Trust, investing. What can we do to move forward?
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for the opportunity to be here and to speak about the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. I think maybe first I'll just give some background on who we are. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is a $7.2 billion mutual fund that invests union pension dollars in 100% union-built affordable housing construction. If you think that sounds like a good idea, you are in great company. The trust has its origins in a conversation in the 1960s between Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and President of the AFL-CIO at the time. The AFL-CIO, by the way, is the peak body of labor unions in the United States. Offices are right across from the White House over there. And they discussed, Dr. King and President Meany discussed how could unions use their pension fund resources to promote housing opportunity in the United States and deal with the housing crisis of that time. Since its inception in its current form, HIT has invested over $11 billion in 620 completed projects, generating 130,000 units of housing, with a total economic impact of nearly $50 billion, all of which has generated $6.6 billion in tax revenues. So it's an impactful model. We have a lot going on right now. We have 39 projects under construction across the country, and we're looking to do a lot more. So grateful to be part of this conversation to talk about how labor can be a partner in addressing the housing crisis.
Eric, good job. We got to leverage this stuff. It's not enough. Clearly, the housing crisis is a supply crisis. Not building enough. Not building it fast enough. So, Bill Kilmer, how do we leverage all of the above with your real estate investment trust guy? How we put all of this together?
Well, I'll let John.
Mortgage Banker Association. I'm sorry.
I'm with the lenders. I'll let John speak to the real estate investment trust side of it. But I actually think convening this group, having all of us up here on this panel, is a great model and a template for dealing with current conditions, because you've got stakeholders, workers, those who sell and market the housing, those who build the housing, those who finance the housing. And it really takes everyone in that ecosystem at the lowest possible level to tackle the problems, because this crisis is national, but it's also very local, as you know, from your time in the industry, Congressman. And Los Angeles in that market is very different from Columbus, Ohio, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And there are different challenges. And what we've tried to do at the Mortgage Bankers Association, while obviously pushing for policies that we think, and I know we'll get into a conversation about some of that later today on the panel through questions or whatnot, as we try to create policies that eliminate frictions for people to overcome the barriers to getting in housing, we think bringing all stakeholders together, nonprofits, housing finance agencies, all units of government that are involved in housing, whether that's local, state, or the federal government, doing what it can to offer carrots and sticks. But again, in sort of a laboratory experiment mode, and we've set up at MBA what we call the Convergence Program, and we've actually got 3 templates in Columbus, Ohio, Memphis, Tennessee, Philadelphia, and we're looking to expand that so that you can build solutions that tackle the challenges, again, at that lowest possible level, but you have all the people involved in the housing chain, together, and fashioning the problems and the challenges together in different buckets so that you can measure the effectiveness of that approach. So that's something that we think it really builds on the notion that it's going to take public-private partnerships to tackle the challenge.
Mr. James Jones. Mr. Jones, please, my apologies.
Thank you very much. I want to first thank Congressman Gomez for hosting this important summit today, and you, Congressman Correa, for having taking the time to moderate such an important panel. And thank you for all the guests for attending. John Jones, on behalf of the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trust, here also on behalf of my CEO, Steve Wexler. Great to be here today. 2 issues in particular. Number one, we have to address the labor issue. The majority of the construction workers in this country are in their 40s and 50s across many states. The robots aren't there yet. We really have to look at how we can adjust curricula in this country, in particular in our trade schools and our high schools. So we have workers who can work on construction sites day one, job ready after graduation. Number 2, we seriously have to deal with the permitting crisis in this country and the not in my backyard crisis in this country. The gentleman mentioned public housing. My grandparents, my father grew up in public housing, the Farragut housing projects in Brooklyn, New York. Where I grew up in New Jersey was a block with public housing. The first home I purchased in my life, when you're talking about that feeling, was in Anacostia in Washington, D.C. I was a staff for 15 years, worked on housing policy in the House and leadership, and as a chief of staff and legislative director in the House of Representatives, again, worked in both the House and Senate on this issue. And let me tell you now, I have the privilege to live just a few steps here on Capitol Hill. And I have arguments with my neighbors who are nice and liberal-minded like myself, that have the Save the Whales posters and the Save the Climate and Save the Water and Save the Deers and everything else. But when it comes to new development, when it comes to new housing, when it comes to new projects, it's no on Amendment 8, no on this, no on that. And that has to stop, and we have to talk about that more. Additionally, as part of NAREIT, we have a portfolio that spans 14 different sectors. In particular, with housing, there's senior housing, student housing. We also focus on multifamily residential housing, but there's also workforce housing and affordable housing. And any way you put it, we have to ensure that those government programs that are in place, like LIHTC, and the agencies that support those programs are intact, because we need housing for our police officers, our nurses, our firemen and women. And so we have to utilize and really focus on those two areas. And then number 3, we have to focus on the utilization of technology. What can we do in the realm of micro-housing, manufactured housing? What can we do to stand up housing as quickly as possible? But unless we deal with the permitting crisis in this country, the zoning crisis in this country, as well as this NIMBYism that is really infested too much of the people who are in decision-making spaces in the local areas. There's no federal Department of Real Estate, right? There's only so much the federal government can do. But on the state level, the local level, and the municipal level, we have to start having more conversations like this, like we're having now, to deal with those issues.
Mr. Lake Olson.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your leadership, by the way. And it's already been mentioned, but the Real Estate Caucus, we're a big supporter of that, and thank you for your leadership. I look at a couple of things at NAHB, and I'm thrilled to be with my fellow panelists here. We're 140,000 members. We do single family, multifamily, and renovate, and everything in the housing supply system is you're a member of NAHB. And we look at this as we're a little clever. We put a 10-point plan together, but we call this the 5 L's after the initial L. So it's about the shortage of labor, the tariffs that deal with lumber, lending, the concerns that we have with adequate lending and interest rates, lots, the lack and the availability of lots and laws and regulation. For single-family builders, 25% of the cost of developing a home is tied to regulatory compliance. And for multifamily builders that are maybe out here today, 41% of the cost of building a multifamily unit is tied to regulatory compliance. So, in short, the solutions as we see it, we would love to see a comprehensive immigration bill with the possibility of an H-2C type visa that would be dedicated. Many of the same issues that John has just mentioned and others, I echo. The labor problem in construction is a significant concern. Streamlining the permitting, as already been said, eliminating tariffs and reducing interest rates. So those are just a sampling of issues that we believe would help address the housing supply shortage.
Joe Harris.
Thank you, sir. Great to be with you. Is this thing on? There it is. Hello, everybody. Joe Harris with the National Association of Realtors. I want to echo my fellow panelists in thanking Congressman Gomez for putting this really important summit together. Anytime we have members of Congress talking about these issues, keeping them at the fore, I think we're doing ourselves a great service. Congressman Correa, thank you so much for your efforts on the real estate caucus. And in your district, you've been a very vocal and consistent drumbeater on the importance of coming up with a comprehensive plan. And it is going to take federal, state, and local efforts to get this thing done in a meaningful way. We're here, I think, in large part because of 4.7 million units short in terms of housing in this country. And it's crazy to think that just back in the mid-2000s, we had a surplus. We had a surplus of housing, and now we find ourselves in a deficit for a number of different reasons. But what our focus is at the National Association of Realtors, obviously, we have 1.4 million members in every zip code in the country. They are responsible for trying to keep the American dream alive for a lot of folks who, quite frankly, have seen it slip away, and it's only getting worse as the years tick along. But we have a real opportunity because real estate is a bipartisan issue. If ever there was an issue that President Trump and Congress could work together on, in every election cycle we've had, housing affordability and availability has been at the forefront of conversations. It's difficult. Obviously it's difficult, or we would have solved the issue by now. But our focus through a lot of research has been on first-time home buyers, and you mentioned the folks in your office who wonder if they'll ever have the opportunity to buy an entry-level home. And also the folks on the other end of that spectrum, the folks who've been in their homes for decades who are kind of stuck because of the capital gains and the tax laws that, quite frankly, disincentivize them from selling their homes. And so our focus have been on those two very key demographics. And I just want to share a couple of stats. In terms of market share for first-time home buyers, in 2024, the market share of first-time home buyers decreased to 24%, which is the lowest since NER began keeping records in 1981. 24%. In 1981, that number was 44%. In terms of the median age of first-time home buyer, that number was 29 years old in 1981. In 2023, it was 35. In 2024, just last year, 38. 29 in 1981, 38 in 2024. And the series of polls and research that we compile over the years, the number one issue for folks who want to own a home, to break through and start building equity is the down payment. It's the number one barrier on every sort of survey that we do. In 2024, the first-time buyers faced a median down payment of 9%. That is the highest in 30 years. And you wonder why they lose faith. The prices are going up, which means the down payment's going to go up. The interest rates remain high. Folks, these young folks graduating with student loan debt, got to take care of that before you start worrying about a down payment. And so there are a lot of things that we really need to focus on, wages, insurance costs that are contributing to the cost of housing. But really what we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to our members about in terms of being that conduit between sort of Congress and the real world is not having the folks who want to get in lose faith, educating them on how they can stay in the game, and making sure that they have the resources to take advantage of that opportunity should it come along. But it's going to take a lot of work to put those resources online. And I also mentioned, and I can go into more of this later, but folks who've been in their home for a very long time, we need to do something to bring the capital gains rates down. And those capital gains caps have been in place since 1997. In 1997, the existing single-family home was $124,000. Okay? 2024, $407,500. Yet the capital gains exclusion remains as it was in 1997. So there's a tremendous amount of pent-up inventory sitting on the sidelines that needs to be unleashed. And so those are the two groups that we've been really focused on and trying to educate lawmakers such as yourselves about ways that they can help create a boom in housing inventory.
Gentlemen, thank you for your comments. Right on. The real estate talk is growing by leaps and bounds, D's and R's. The challenge that we have is bubbling up to the top. You begin to pull this issue and you'll find out it's probably going to top everything else around us. So the question for me to you is, how do we move from this, that's a problem, to action? How do we keep legislators across the street, how do we keep their feet to the fire? This is not a labor, private sector, government, it's all the above issue. But how do we make sure that we score on this stuff? Quickly, Mr. Foreman. Okay. Not anymore.
What did I do? Testing again.
We kind of need you to really help us get these folks involved to make sure that political pressure is there.
Well, I want to thank my colleague Bill from the Mortgage Bankers Association for the working microphone, and I think that's the kind of coalition building that we need is to bring together. Exactly. When this country was at its strongest, labor was a key stakeholder, and still is, in these in the coalitions that are shaping our economy. So to take a step back, going back to your question of how we get this done, I'd like to highlight the importance of union labor and labor as a stakeholder here, both politically, labor's political power, but also economically, the difference it makes to get this work done with union labor. More than 100 years ago, Henry Ford had the insight that he wanted to make sure that the workers on his assembly lines could afford to buy the product they were making. When housing is built with union labor, workers are paid fair, family-supporting wages that allow them to become home buyers. That's what we need to kick off a building boom. By comparison, and I think this is a bit of a public secret, so I'm not telling folks anything they don't know, on non-union job sites, workers are often paid sub-minimum wages. That's illegal. Employers are not paying into workers' compensation funds. Workers do not have insurance. The job sites are much more dangerous. The rate of injury and death is much higher on non-union versus union job sites. And so we need to make sure we build the right way. And if we do that, it will kick off the kind of economic growth that we need, allowing more American families to buy their own homes.
Mr. Jones.
It's important to have solutions that just aren't in our particular environments, but we have to actually look across the world. Because right now, the housing challenges aren't unique to America. This is this is happening around the world, this concern of affordability and the lack of supply. In terms of office buildings, that's an American phenomenon, where you see the empty buildings across the country. Now, the Class A buildings, meaning the best building in the best cities, are pretty much full. They're by transit areas, they're by commercial areas, they're by areas by schools where there's a lot of development. In Munich, Germany, the Class A vacancy is 1%. Tokyo, Japan, 4%. Seoul, Korea, 2%. So again, it's an American phenomenon. So with these empty buildings, we need to look at what we can do in terms of solutions, in terms of conversions. CBRE did a study from 2017 to 2022, 42 conversions per year. Do you know how many there were in 2023? 100. Nearly half of those conversions were to multifamily residential housing. So that's a solution that can be utilized right now, especially on the municipal and state level, with the support by federal partners as well. And we have to look at what we can do in our tax regime to make that quicker, more affordable, and more shovel-ready.
Mr. Gilmer.
Yeah, so Congressman, I think you nailed it when you said it needs to be an all-the-above strategy in terms of getting traction. And also, when you talked about the bipartisan nature, Joe talked about this as well, the bipartisan nature of housing as a policy topic, that your caucus, for the real estate caucus in the House, is growing on both sides of the political aisle. And we can look to a phenomenon in the Senate Banking Committee a couple of weeks ago where Tim Scott, as chairman of the committee, Republican, and Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, Democrat ranking member, had what they called a hallelujah moment when they had a 24-0 vote on housing policy. And it was not one singular silver bullet. The bill is called, the package is referred to as the Road to Housing. That is bicameral legislation. There's a House companion that was introduced that mirrors the Scott bill, but it became over 40 different proposals, none of which were going to solve this problem we're discussing in and of themselves. But when you couple those together, this crisis is not a singular solvable type of crisis. It's going to take hammering away and making incremental progress given the obstacles that we've talked about. And so I think it's encouraging to see that there's now, like literally while we're here, a conversation going on at the leadership level, as you said, to get this to rise up to the top and get attention and floor time to try to tack the Road to Housing bill in the Senate onto the National Defense Authorization Act. Obviously, we're all policy items that want to ride on a moving vehicle, get contemplated and hundreds of amendments get filed. But I think it's a good sign. It's an encouraging sign. Real estate, I think, fared pretty well in the HR1 debate. And again, there's bipartisan support. Joe mentioned the capital gains exclusion, doubling that and indexing it for inflation. But in Road to Housing, there are similar concepts. Like on the multifamily side, 20% of our members at MBA are involved in the financing of commercial and multifamily properties, and the HUD, FHA multifamily program, needs to better reflect construction cost and inflation impacts. And so in that Road to Housing bill, Senator Gallego, who you're going to hear from later on, and Senator McCormick had a bipartisan proposal to raise the loan limit so that the multifamily housing financed through HUD would better reflect the cost of that kind of construction and financing and produce more efficiently a HUD FHA multifamily units. There were rural housing service, USDA housing program reforms that were part of that bill to make the loans more assumable, make that program more accessible for Americans using different technologies and the variety that you need. The growth in this accessory dwelling unit phenomenon where you have people living in smaller physical housing units, but people being better able to finance those units. So that's
Japanese model.
That's it. So that's a more accessible form of possible shelter for people. So I mean, the solutions are out there, and there's a willingness now.
Just got to have the political will, put it together and score.
Exactly.
Lake, go ahead.
I think a few quick things that Congress could do, Congressman, would be create and pass legislation that would provide a visa for construction workers. And
Joe,
so short. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm getting ready to close
education.
down.
education and research in terms of holding folks' feet to the fire. I think I mentioned this idea of capital gains exclusion. A lot of members of Congress, red states, look at that and they say, that doesn't affect my state. Well, we have a lot of research that shows that it really does, that there are folks that are not moving because it does not make economic sense for them to do so. And so sharing that research, making sure that our members are educating people in their communities, I think that's how you hold folks' feet to the fire. Knowledge through education and through research.
If I could just add one point.
Go ahead.
Late, my brother in real estate made a very, very good point mentioning in terms of visas for construction workers. When we talk about bipartisan solutions, this is something the president actually supports in terms of legal guest worker visas, so we can have folks, again, ready on construction sites to increase that supply. So thank you for mentioning
Let's get it done, and I'm on it. Go ahead.
I would just add that
15
right
seconds.
Now, the building trades unions run apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs that have over 500,000 workers obtaining state-of-the-art training in how to build the housing we need. Those workers are ready for hire. So let's get this done union and put them
What am I
work.
hearing? The new millionaires are plumbers and electricians?
Sorry?
Yes, the new millionaires out there are going to be plumbers and electricians.
I wouldn't say millionaires,
Let me just
but earning good family-sustaining wages that
with
let
a big
them
ask
buy
from
the
my
housing
end.
they're building.
I'm going to ask you to meet again and talk to my folks in the real estate caucus about some solutions. We got to strike right now and get it done. Thank you very much, everybody. Jimmy, where's Jimmy G? For creating this great opportunity. Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists. And to introduce our keynote speaker, please welcome back Congressman Jimmy Gomez.
All right, everybody. So first, let's give Lou Correa and these panelists another round of applause. And our keynote speaker for today is somebody that I know very, very well. I've known him since 2002, and we met outside of a bar here in Washington, D.C. Go figure. He was in undergrad at Harvard, and I was in grad school, and we really did discover that we have a lot in common. He is a son of immigrant parents. He's a Marine veteran, besides that, who served in Iraq, and he's just a relentless fighter for working families. He's been traveling the country for a number of reasons, I don't know why, to understand the struggles that millions of Americans face, paying rent, buying a home, and simply trying to give their kids a better future. In the Senate, he's used that understanding and turned it into action. With his Senate colleagues, he helped advance a bipartisan housing package that included several of his own bills. A bill to expand the financing of affordable home building, a bill to support veterans and rural communities, and a bill to cut red tape and make housing programs work better for all families. His work reminds us why we are here today, to think bigger about housing, to build stronger partnerships, and to deliver results that match the scale of this crisis. With that, I'm honored to introduce a good friend, Senator Ruben Gallego.
Thank you. It's always, Jimmy's a best friend. I don't know why I got demoted to good friend, but whatever. Leave the house, they just forget about you. But Jimmy and I have really known each other for now 23 years. And, when I first met him, it was remarkable to meet another Latino at Harvard because there were such few of us, and that's why we instantly connected. And we've always kind of had the same drive to make sure that, young men and women, especially of color, have the same opportunities that we had growing up. We are truly living the American dream. But when I met Jimmy Gomez, one of the things that I always kind of keep in the back of my mind was that was at that point the few times in my life at that point that I was actually in a bed. Growing up because of economic reasons and I guess what we call being poor, my mom really could only afford a 2-bedroom apartment for me and my 3 sisters. So my bed was actually the living room, and it was the living room floor for about almost 8 years. And so my first bed was actually my dorm room bed at Harvard. And I was just so excited to see it. And, when I first got to my room and I met my roommate was just complaining, and I had some tears going down to my eyes. And he said, "Are you mad that we have bunk beds?" I'm like, "No, I'm happy I have a bed." Right? The problem is that is now more common than not common, right? And one of the things that I've been trying to work at in the Senate and in the House is to make sure that is something that we try earnestly to deliver. Because right now, we need to have Americans to have a safe, affordable place to call home. And for many of our hardworking Americans, they do not have the opportunity. And also, they're missing the opportunity to really, truly build generational wealth, right? Especially for younger communities of color. They're going to be missing that opportunity to have that first rung of middle class statue that really helped so many people during the post-World War II generation. One of the things that I valued about what my mom did was the fact that it was not a great place. I remember having to figure out how to, get our place warmed up when the heat went down, and working on, boiling water, whatever we could. But it was stable. It was the same school district that all my sisters had gone. It was the neighbors that we knew. It was stable rent that was predictable for her to understand how much she's going to have to pay year in and year out. It was something that she could understand was going to give her stability and security for her family. Right now, if she had been in that same situation, she would have not been able to afford it. In the time that I'm talking to you right now, it has cost an average of price of a home has increased by over 500%. Meanwhile, our incomes have only increased by 19%. So while costs have skyrocketed, wages have not kept up. And I don't have to tell many of you guys see this out in the field. So I remember actually when I finally helped my mom get her first house. And it was one of the most moving moments to see a very proud Colombian woman, and if you guys know Colombians, they are very proud, to see her emotionally, just break down because she knew that finally she had something stable to call home for her and for her kids. The fact that we have a lot of Americans that can't have that emotional understanding, that will never have the emotional understanding, really tells us that the situation we're in a very ghost of Christmas past there. The situation that we're in right now. In Arizona, the average age of the first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. So an entire generation of young people are either stuck at their parents' home, living with roommates, couch surfing, but no matter what we think about it, they're going to be on track to be the poorest generation of Americans since the turn of the 19th century if we don't change things. And there's a lot of things that have really brought us to this point. And they did not occur over one administration. It occurred over many administrations, and a lot of it has just stacked on and piled on. We've had underinvestment from our communities, whether it's local municipalities or federals. We've had government red tape. We have rising construction costs. We have labor shortages, especially now. And then, of course, we have investor-driven market consolidation that's happening a lot in the West. So to put it simply, housing supply has just not kept up with demand. In Arizona, to give you a good example, from 2010 to 2021, our population grew by 13%. But the number of housing units that grew has only grown by 10%. And that 3% is where we're feeling the pinch. That gap seems small, but it's having a huge effect on the everyday prices and, of course, the real situation people are living in. From 2010 to 2014, Typical home value in Arizona almost doubled, and rents went up by 72%. So the idea of someone like my mom, a hardworking single mom, could she afford a 2-bedroom apartment right now, or even a young person to buy their own home and start really building wealth, is starting to become less and less likely. So what we see, and I'll give you a perfect example, is my first home in Arizona that I bought was at 25, which is extremely common. And that was only a short 18 years ago. The population in Arizona now that is trying to buy a home is now more likely to be someone who is retired than someone who is starting out their life. So what can we do? Number one, we need to cut red tape and make it easier to get projects off the ground. Government needs to be part of the solution, not the impediment to the solution. Now, on the Senate Banking Committee, we've really been working on this. So we passed a bipartisan housing bill, Representative Gomez is talking about, that really worked across the aisle to look at everything. And the approach we took to this wasn't that there was any sacred cows. And so red tape was not a constituency, nor should it ever be a constituency for any party. Government bureaucracy, government workers, government permitting, or any new ideas need to really be put on the table. And that's the approach we actually took when it came to this bill. And that's why it came out with unanimous support of all senators, Democrats and Republicans. Any day, by the way, that you can get Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Elizabeth Warren on the same page, on the same bill, and get something done in a unanimous manner, tells you that this is the emergent situation that we're in, that we need to actually deal with this as a real existential threat to the American economy. One of the bills I'm very proud of gives HUD the authority to just adjust loan limits. Simple stuff, right? For many years, if you wanted to build multifamily housing, there was only so much of money you could loan out through HUD. We all know the price of everything has gone up. You know the price of construction has gone up. Labor has gone up. Price of everything has gone up. But the funding mechanism and how much you were allowed to borrow had not gone up. A very simple fix, and we were able to move that. We've also just tried to streamline permitting process, improve coordination between federal agencies. We discovered that there was, in order for you to get certain permits, you had to both go through HUD and sometimes through SBA in order to finally get someone else to issue another permit. These are the kind of things that seem very dumb, but actually have been a true impediment to actually any type of movement. But we need to think bigger, and we need to be thinking faster. One of my concerns is that we are trying to look at this and treat this as if it continues to be a real everyday problem, when instead of dealing with this as real existential threats. Now, my opinion, and we're working on legislation to this, is that there shouldn't be any more federal buildings that are built without any type of affordable housing on top, right? We should be opening up every type of federal building available in the United States to allow developers to actually look at them and figure out how they can redevelop them, both to have a governmental purpose. So I'll give you a good example, which pisses off my staff. You know, why do we have post offices in this country that are one floors in some of the most dense areas in the country, right? Why not work with a developer to actually tear down that post office, make the post office the first floor again, and then put affordable housing as much as you can to the top, while avoiding a lot of the problems when it comes to local zoning laws and things of that nature, because we try to keep it under federal jurisdiction. You know, we had a big argument this year about federal lands, and there was a really bad approach that the Donald Trump and Senator Mike Lee took, where they were just going to wholesale give property away in hopes that there would be some affordable housing. For us that are in the West, for example, we are very much in a hard housing crunch. If you look at some of the largest problems of affordability, it's actually in rural parts of our country. For you Easterners and some of you West Coasters, you have to understand that places like Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, we find ourselves surrounded a lot of times by federal land. So you'll go to some of the smallest cities. I'll give you a good example, Cottonwood, Arizona, where it's beautiful communities that want to have development there, want to have people live there, but even the housing director of that city has to live an hour away because there is no land to build. City of Sedona, which many of you guys have attended a couple of times, maybe on one of my PAC trips, who knows, it's a beautiful example of a great city in the middle of an middle of a rural and natural landscape. But the workers that take care of the richest people in the world, the most powerful people that go to conferences there, are driving usually an hour and a half each way to work to be able to afford. And in order for them to find any place to build, they first would have to find federal land to get it and then to build it. And then, of course, we have the secondary problem of that most of the housing that has been built and bought in Sedona has been bought for the use of short-term vacation rentals. So what we see is a problem, a generational problem, a problem that now actually plagues every demographic within the population of this country, whether it's white, black, Latino. We have shortages on our Native American lands. We have now an increased homelessness when it comes to our senior citizens, and it all comes down to the fact that we need radical, quick, and decisive change of our housing policy, because we are going to continue to put that next generation further and further behind and poorer behind. And if you see what happened to this country, and if you see what happened to this country in the post-World War II economy, one of the largest drivers of that was the GI housing bill. That created the wealth that we have built everything upon this country on. And the fact that we're going to not take the lessons that really reordered the world economy, that made us the strongest, powerful economy in the history of the world, we're not going to take the lessons of that and apply it to this generation and do something to make sure they at least have a fighting chance. As policymakers, as leaders, as nonprofit leaders, we are giving and passing on a mortal sin to this generation. So please continue doing whatever you can in your perspective fields in your world. We certainly are going to be doing some things that I think will rattle some cages, some things that will actually maybe go against the grain of what a Democrat should think or what a Republican should think. But this is a real test of policymaking, of leadership. If we don't get this right, and if we don't get this right in a short time frame, less than 10 years, we're going to see some horrible outcomes when it comes to our families. And just to end this note, on a personal note, when many years ago, or it seems many years ago, when I decided to run for the Senate, one of the things that before announcing, I took my family back to that apartment, and I get a little emotional about it. But I took my family back to that apartment one more time before I publicly announced that I was going to run for Senate. And for some of you guys know, it was not going to be a very easy fight. It was going to be myself going against an incumbent and against a very strong Republican Party in Arizona. And I took my family back there because I wanted to remind them and myself what I was fighting for. And what I was fighting for was that woman, my mother, who worked hard to keep that rent. For, the boy or girl that has to sleep on the ground and wake up and go to school. For my sisters who had to share a room. That's the reminder that I need. And so when I tell you that this is personal, make sure you understand I mean it. But it's also personal to so many people out there. They just want that one first step. They just want that one opportunity to say that this is mine and I have earned this. And we as policymakers, we as leaders, and you as corporate nonprofit leaders, you need to step up to the plate too. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, Senator Gallego. Let's give him another round of applause. We're now at the part of our program where we break for lunch. A reminder that lunch is on your own, and a reminder to be back here promptly at 1 p.m. We've got a strong lineup for the afternoon that you don't want to miss. There's a cafeteria at the Capitol Visitor Center. which is just across the street, the entrance there. For those familiar with the Capitol complex, you can also go to the Longworth cafeteria. And just 2 blocks down from here, there's several restaurants down Independence Avenue. So again, 1 p.m., please be back here promptly, and we look forward to seeing all of your faces again. Thank you.